Alright, I'm just gonna get straight to the point with this one. While it doesn't make Breath of the Wild obsolete, Tears of the Kingdom is better in almost every way. The Legend of Zelda's first open-world game was an incredible experience, and while it was very fun, it certainly had a lot of growing pains. I loved the game, but I knew full well that whatever came next would be better, and Tears of the Kingdom is a big improvement over it. A lot of issues were addressed, and the new things it brings to the table are handled very well. So you know what? Let's not waste any more time and just get right into it. Set at some point after the events of Breath of the Wild, Link and Zelda are exploring deep underneath Hyrule Castle for the source of the gloom, puddles of malice that have been appearing all over the kingdom, making others sick. They get way more than they bargained for when they find the currently dehydrated body of Ganondorf, who's just broken free of his imprisonment and none too happy. He then not only manages to break the Master Sword, but also messes up Link so badly, he weakens him Metroidvania style and lowers his hearts and stamina. He also damages Link's arm so severely that it needs to be replaced with the right arm of Rauru, a Zonai who sealed Ganondorf away during this Hyrule's imprisoning war. Now armed with a new set of Zonai abilities, Link sets out to find the currently missing Zelda and figure out what exactly is even going on after Ganondorf causes the upheaval, an event that eroded all of Hyrule's weapons and caused weird regional phenomenon all over the kingdom. While I still really liked the first game's opening, I love Tears of the Kingdom's more. It shows just how threatening Ganondorf is this time around in a really nice way. I do think I prefer Breath of the Wild's tutorial area over Tears of the Kingdom's though. The former doesn't take quite as long to get through, with the latter's easily taking 3.5 to 4 hours. To be fair though, while I do still think it could have been handled a bit better, I feel as though the length of the Great Sky Island was a necessary evil. Tears of the Kingdom does not operate under all of the same rules as Breath of the Wild, and Ultra Hand by itself is a very important and kind of complex power. So it's very important that the player understands all of the basics before they leave, which is probably why the tutorial takes longer this time around. That being said though, there is an elephant in the room we need to discuss before moving on: the absence of the Sheikah tech. From what I've seen of it, Tears of the Kingdom has a bit of a continuity problem, with a lot of side characters not remembering you, and more importantly, with a lack of any mention for what happened to the Sheikah tech. The towers and Sheikah slates could have been refurbished into this game's Skyview Towers and the new Purah pad, but what happened to all of the shrines and the divine beasts? Those are a pretty important part of the last game's story, and it's weird there's no mention of what they did with them after the ending of Breath of the Wild. Going a step further, let's talk about the Shrine of Resurrection and how it's gone and replaced with a cave, yet still referred to by the same name. I've heard the idea that they stripped everything for parts, but the problem is that the shrine was also an elevator down to the final trial, a dungeon meant to test the hero. If they took it apart piece by piece, there shouldn't be an actual cave here, just a hole in the wall with a straight drop into the depths immediately after. But the fact that it is a cave implies that not only did they take it apart, but they also filled it in with 100 or so tons of rock and dirt once they were done. Like, I didn't need the greatest explanation by any means, but I would have appreciated at least some mention from Purah or Robbie for what happened to all of this stuff. There's a lot to go over this time around, so let's start with primarily all of the new stuff Tears of the Kingdom adds with Link's new Zonai abilities. To be honest, while I liked Breath of the Wild's Sheikah runes, I love the powers Link's new Zonai hand gives him more. While the former definitely could have been utilized in effective ways while exploring, they felt like they were built more for the shrines and dungeons than anything else. The Zonai abilities, however, feel like they were designed with the entire game in mind, and not just primarily one or two parts of it. Unlike the last game, I was using all of them while exploring far more frequently, with each one being really useful. Ascend is great for getting up to places and getting around the rain if you can find a low enough ceiling, with Tears of the Kingdom's new caves and wells adding a lot more situations where you'll be able to use this. Fuse honestly helps make the weapon durability less of an issue by giving the players some control over not only how strong their weapons are, but how much they can use them, since Fuse restores and increases their durability. This subsequently also gives you more of a reason to fight monsters, since the best way to increase your weapon's damage is by fusing them with monster parts. You can also add different properties to your weapons based on what monster part you fuse to it, like elemental damage, adding in a good bit of customization for your arsenal. This also applies to your arrows, which you can fuse with monster parts or materials to add more damage or different effects. If I had one criticism though, I don't get why I can't fuse my weapons with the quick menu like I can with arrows. It seems needlessly clunky that I have to manually take out materials if I want to fuse a weapon with something if it isn't already on the ground. Recall is a useful tool that rewinds an object's movement back to a certain point. This is useful for getting to sky islands with the falling debris as well as puzzles and potentially even in combat. Ultra Hand, though, is absolutely the star of the show here. With this, not only can you move around most objects, but you'll also be able to build vehicles and contraptions with various objects and zonai devices. I may not be super creative when it comes to making vehicles, but let me tell you, the possibilities for what you can make with this ability is only limited by the parts you have on hand and your own imagination. Honestly, it's kind of amazing just how much mileage Tears of the Kingdom gets out of just this one power, especially in the shrines this time around, since this was what I used like 80% of the time. On the note of the shrines though, I gotta say, there's a pretty strong argument that the Zonai shrines are objectively better than the Sheikah ones. Not only do the puzzles feel more unique from one another, but they also fixed a problem they had last time. You see, in Breath of the Wild, there were a large number of shrines that were either tests of strength that had you fight one tough enemy, or divine blessings that rewarded you just by finding or getting to the shrine. Here though, if you're given a blessing, it's pretty likely you had to do a good bit of work to get into the shrine from my experience, and the tests of strength have been completely replaced with the proving grounds. These are reminiscent of the last game's shrine quest, Eventide Isle, with you being deprived of your armor and equipment and tasked with killing constructs with whatever you can find in the shrine. Each one also puts you into a unique situation you'll have to work around that makes sure they all feel unique. The shrines also make for great tutorials on how to effectively use the various zonai devices. One of my favorite learning moments was when a shrine taught me that fans can create a bit of an updraft for Link to ride. It got me really thinking about just what else I could do with these. Switching to a different subject though, let's talk about how much bigger this game is because wow did they expand on Hyrule. We of course have the new and improved surface, but we also now have the Sky Islands and the Depths, a massive underground that spans all of Hyrule. Starting from the top, the Sky Islands are a cool addition to the game, but I do kinda wish there were more of them. The devs have said that they had to cut back on the Sky Islands because it took away from the appearance of Hyrule. While I can both understand and even respect that, I do feel like they could have made a few more islands or alternatively made some of the pre-existing ones a bit bigger to compensate. Due to this and how copy and paste some of them can be, this is my least favorite major addition to the game. I do still really like them, don't get me wrong, I just think they could have been handled a bit better. The surface of Hyrule has been altered pretty drastically in a lot of ways, like with the previously mentioned caves and even wells, but the two big changes I want to mention here are the Skyview Towers and the chasms. The former takes the place of the last game's Sheikah Towers, and I like Tears of the Kingdom's take on them a lot more. While I do enjoy climbing the towers in Breath of the Wild since that sometimes felt like a puzzle in and of itself, the Skyview Towers are just an upgrade. This time around, the towers launch Link high into the air to gather data, and afterwards you can relaunch yourself whenever you want to help you with getting to Sky Islands, general travel, or even getting you a really good vantage point to spot an area's shrines. The chasms are massive holes dotting Hyrule that you can safely jump right into once you have the paraglider. This of course leads us right into our next talking point, the depths. The depths are a dark and very unfriendly feeling series of interconnected caverns that, as I mentioned earlier, span across all of Hyrule. Here, Ganondorf's malice is very abundant, with it covering a lot of area and even the monsters themselves. This brings us to a new status effect introduced in this game, Gloom. When touching pools of malice or even being hit by malice-covered enemies, it'll either slowly or immediately start nullifying your hearts. To reverse the gloom, you can eat dishes made with Sundelions, return to the surface, or visit the depth's own version of towers, the Light Roots. When activated, these light up a portion of the depths, not only letting you actually see without bright bloom seeds, but also filling out a section of the depths on your map. And let me tell you, as a man with a fear of complete darkness, activating these things were satisfying on a level I can't even begin to describe. Those of you with a similar fear know exactly what I'm talking about though. Now the reason you'll be going down here is for primarily gathering a material called Zonite, a special ore that can be used for creating Zonite charges and even special crystal charges that Link can use to upgrade his battery once he has 100. If you're big into building complex vehicles or contraptions, you'll probably be down here a lot, but if you only use these things when needed, you don't need to go down here too much. The beauty of Tears of the Kingdom and really open world Zelda as a whole is that you can play however you want, and the game will respect that. You utilize the tools as much or as little as you want to use them. And honestly, despite having played through Breath of the Wild again like 2 months ago, Tears of the Kingdom's Hyrule really did feel completely fresh and new for me. The devs managed to perfectly capture that same sense of magic and wonder that I felt 6 years ago with Breath of the Wild, but even greater. There's a lot of other stuff with the world that I don't want to go into since the game is still very new, but as far as I'm concerned, Hyrule has never been better and more fun to explore. In fact, on the note of things being better, let's talk about some much needed improvements, because Tears of the Kingdom has them in spades. But first, I want to quickly mention a problem that I'm appalled they didn't address at all. Why can I still not pet the dogs? I mean, look at this happy floof. They had 6 years to make this game, and I still can't give this clearly very good boy pets or scritches. This game is still incredible regardless, but I'm very disappointed in you, Zelda team. Besides that, though, most other issues were addressed in some way. I've already mentioned the weapon durability and shrines, but there's also the difficulty. You see, Breath of the Wild started out kinda rough, but after about 8 or so hours, the game's difficulty would start going further and further down for, frankly, a lot of reasons, none of which were good. Tears of the Kingdom, though, has a far more consistent level of difficulty and is just a harder game in general. You'll encounter stronger versions of enemies like blue-tiered bokoblins more than you will the base version. Combine this with armor being far more balanced this time around, and it being harder to get access to stronger upgrades from the Great Fairies, and this means that the amount of damage you'll take early to mid-game is, on average, much higher than in Breath of the Wild. Then there's the actual enemy variety, and it's so much better here. I didn't touch on it much in my initial review, but Breath of the Wild was really lacking in this department. What it did have was very good, but for a Zelda game, especially one that's open world, I was expecting a lot more. Here though, I think the enemy count is straight up doubled, and a lot of them are really cool. I don't want to go into too many for spoiler reasons, so here are two of my favorites. While these guys aren't quite the same thing, the frogs are basically just frog Dodongos, and while I still hope to see Dodongos return properly someday in an open-world Zelda, I really like their amphibious cousins. The star of the show and my personal favorites, though, are the Gleeoks, cause wow did they get an upgrade. This time around, they are genuinely terrifying with how strong they are. My first time fighting one was during a side quest in which I needed to help a woman get Zelda's horse back. She'd get it herself, but the Frost Gleeok makes it too dangerous. I figured I could take it with not much issue. I was wrong. So after being completely destroyed, I decided to come back and fight it much later, and honestly, the Gleeoks are all really great fights. Each version is just unique enough that you won't be able to tackle them the exact same way, especially when you take into account their final phase super attack. By far one of my favorite improvements, though, is the addition of slip resistance. With this one thing, you can now, to some degree, get around the negative effects of rain when you need to climb somewhere. Heck, there's now an entire armor set you can get through a massive side quest chain with the Lucky Clover Gazette, dedicated to this new resistance. Thanks to this and the machines you can make with Ultra Hand, the infamous and annoying rain is no longer an issue. You know what else isn't an issue, though? The Divine Beasts, or should I say, the lack thereof, because the dungeons this time around are so much better. Breath of the Wild's Divine Beasts were perfectly fine. They weren't bad at all, I did still enjoy them, but they were very underwhelming. The interiors and bosses all looked visually very similar, and the dungeons themselves just felt like big shrines. Tears of the Kingdom addresses all of these problems, though. They all feel far more unique from one another, and the bosses had a lot more variety to them. I also think the lead-up to them is generally better as well. A few of Breath of the Wild's dungeon lead-ups were kinda weak, with the Rito having easily the weakest in that they basically didn't have one. Here, though, the quality was much more consistent and generally was better across the board. One of my favorite memorable moments when first entering a region was with the Zora. I flew in through Linneiru's tower and had an audible "the heck happened here" moment when I saw just how polluted it became thanks to the sludge pouring out from the water temple. As for the dungeons themselves, though, while I personally loved them, I've seen some divisive opinions on them. Everyone generally agrees they're better than the Divine Beasts, but how much people like them varies greatly. Some love them and don't have much issue, while others think the dungeons are too open-ended and special rules or restrictions would make them better. Admittedly, I can see both sides. I personally really enjoy the open-ended nature of the dungeons. There's a beauty in the idea of having so many different ways to tackle any one puzzle or problem, and it helps to set Tears of the Kingdom apart from other open-world games. However, I can't deny that maybe they are too open-ended. I mean, I got through the Fire Temple by mostly just climbing and ascending through things, cutting out a lot of the puzzles. There are some other issues with them though, like the length of the actual temples and their overall structure. If we're counting the pre-dungeon section to them, they're not that bad lengthwise, but the physical temple definitely could have stood to be longer, even by only 30 minutes. Structure-wise, they're all similar to the Divine Beasts in that you have to activate 4 to 5 things to solve some kind of problem or to open the way into another room. My take on all this is that I personally think the Zelda team is really close to nailing this new style of dungeon for the series. They just need to iron some things out and change up a few things about the structure. While I like the idea of the dungeons being built around solving puzzles for some kind of overall goal that somehow leads you to the boss, I think they relied too much on the terminal-esque structure for the dungeons. I think it would be better to break it down into having separate unique issues you need to solve, or just one issue with multiple different unique parts that you can solve in a variety of different ways. That being said though, there's one major element of the dungeons I've neglected to mention up to this point with each one's partner character. When going through one of the temples, Link will have somebody with him that has an ability you'll use for puzzle solving. After you finish the dungeon, you'll be able to summon or dismiss an avatar of that character who will then accompany you on the adventure, allowing you to use that character's ability outside of the dungeon. These are this game's version of champion abilities, and while they're thankfully far less overpowered, they're not exactly perfect. Tulin's power is basically Rivali's, but it blows you horizontally instead of vertically, so it's easily the most useful one here. Sidon's power is great for if you have Zora weapons, since Sidon's water shield perfectly surrounds Link in water, and the Zora weapons get stronger when Link is wet. Outside of that in the dungeon though, I didn't find much use for it, to be honest. Yunobo's power is great for breaking certain rocks in an enemy's rock armor should they have it, and he also works as a cannonball for when you pilot a vehicle. Beyond that though, I also didn't use this one much. Rage's power is probably the most useful one behind Tulin's. With it you can have her charge up a lightning field that you can use to hit enemies wherever you fire an arrow at. I did the Gerudo Desert Temple last, so I never needed to use Rage's power much, but in the early game I could absolutely see this ability being very useful for dealing with stronger enemies. That being said, the AI for them isn't exactly bright. They're not really great about staying close to Link, and they're kinda slow with attacking other enemies. It also gets hard to manage using abilities when you have more than 2 avatars summoned because of having to A, keep them all together, and B, that the ability is used by being near them and pressing A. I really like the idea of Link adventuring with a partner and them helping in dungeons. It's something I'd love to see returned in the next game as a major mechanic, but it definitely needs some work. That being said though, none of anything I've criticized so far is the primary reason I refer to this game as almost a perfect sequel in the title of this video. You see, while Tears of the Kingdom does improve on most of Breath of the Wild's issues, there's one thing it doesn't improve on with the story. There's one big flaw that really stands out for me with it, so skip to here if you want to avoid spoilers. With that being said, let's get into why, despite my love for the story, it's not exactly handled the greatest way. There's a lot about this story I really like, but I don't enjoy the way it's told in regards to how the Dragon Tears were handled. The Dragon Tears and Geoglyphs take the place of Breath of the Wild's memories, and unlike the last game, I can't give a pass to this kind of storytelling again. Like, I get that with Zelda having traveled back in time, there wasn't really a perfect way to tell her side of the story, but these shouldn't have been available to obtain until you start the associating quest with Impa. The memories tell a story that should be linearly experienced, but the fact that you can easily see them out of order without going through Impa's quest first is a baffling design choice for me. I also just don't like that I have to actively hunt down the cutscenes for what is genuinely a really good story. It arguably works for Breath of the Wild due to the focus being on the gameplay and exploration, but here, it's like Tears of the Kingdom's overall story is in almost complete conflict with the game's design philosophy. That being said though, this game's final act was incredible. First off, Ganondorf is a way better final boss than Calamity Ganon was. I love how he feels so much like an equal to Link, with him being able to use all the same weapon types. His ability to bullet time dodge your attacks just like you can though scared the crap out of me. Every time it happened, there was always some part of me that thought he was going to flurry rush me and win the fight right there. So the first few phases of this fight were great, but then in a wonderful thematic parallel to Zelda, he eats his stone and turns into a frickin' dragon who you fight with the help of Dragon Zelda hundreds of feet in the air. This is a very well done spectacle fight. They tried something similar with Dark Beast Ganon in the last game, but to say it was lacking there would be an understatement. The demon dragon is visually very cool looking while also feeling cool to actually fight. The moment gets better though when after his defeat, Rauru and Sonia from the grave use their powers to change Zelda back into a Hylian. Link then has to try and catch Zelda as she's falling, but actually succeed this time in a wonderful sort of parallel to the game's opening. Honestly, this whole moment, along with the knowledge that they're living together, managed to finally edge out this version of Link and Zelda's relationship as my favorite. Tears of the Kingdom also made me really want an adventure with these two together through the whole thing. Cause honestly, this woman deserves an adventure with her man that does not involve having to play the vital waiting game. She's certainly capable enough, and heck, after the game's post-credits scene, due to the events of the game and her newfound desire for peace in Hyrule, she seems to have the kind of drive necessary for it. Come on, Zelda team, make her Link's partner for the next game. Have her help out with shrine equivalents, exploration, and dungeons. It'd be cool, and everyone would love it. Tears of the Kingdom is a wonderful sequel. It improves on so many different aspects of Breath of the Wild, and while there's a lot of room for growth with this new style for the series, I absolutely love this game. Hyrule felt even better to explore this time around thanks to the incredibly well-made Zonai abilities in the new areas, and the combat was even better as well for a whole host of different reasons. This game was worth all of the delays, and it makes me really curious just what's next for the series. It's possible this game's inevitable DLC will expand on that a bit, but for right now, there's no telling what will happen next. Until then, hopefully we can at least get some new 2D games while we wait, or even some much needed remakes for the Oracle games. Thank you all for watching, like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and I hope you all have a nice day.